Tom, it's really good to see you, and I was fascinated by that print just above your head, which I gather came from the Tate Modern at some point.
Yeah, that came at Tate Modern. So yeah, I bought that about 10 years ago. I'll give it a little view again. But yeah, it's a silk screen by Ian Stevenson. A good screen print, yeah.
And it simply says, "I'll print you a picture."
Yeah, it's good you can read that, because on mine, of course, it's reversed, but it's good that you can actually see what it's written on there.
Yes, and tell me about Ian Stevenson. Is that the one I knew who was a stationer?
I'm not too familiar with his stationer, so I'm not sure what he's up to currently. But I remember at university, we were very much into him. I studied illustration, and that sort of style really resonated with me. So he's kind of, I'd almost say he's like a bit like David Shrigley, who's a very famous artist that does kind of like quite spontaneous kind of caricatures and drawings, and makes commentary on the sort of popular culture and things like that.
Well, very sadly, the Ian Stevenson I know has died, but he wasn't that old either, and he was on the Hall and Heritage Committee, which I chaired for a while. But I can't remember quite now what he had a university background, so maybe it was the same person. Possibly. Anyway, so let's start at the beginning, as it were. What part of the country do you come from originally?
So I'm originally from Ipswich in Suffolk. So I lived there until I was about 18 years old, until I started university. So yeah, that's all my background.
So you're a good Suffolk man.
Yeah, I don't have the accent. I don't have the East Anglian accent on me, but yeah, that's where I'm from.
No, that accent. I was the Dean of Norwich for 8 years, and we learned a lot about the accent. And the further up East Anglia you go, the stronger the accent becomes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, that's right. All sort of, "How are you, my woman?" they'd say. "How are you, my woman? Can you hear what I'm saying?" Yes. Yes. "How long have you lived here?"
Exactly. I mean, Norwich is a bit, for me, at least I've got to say, this is my personal experience. Norwich is a bit nicer than Ipswich. I mean, Ipswich, it's all right. I mean, Suffolk as a county, I really, now I've gotten older, I can really appreciate the landscapes, and same true of Norfolk as well. It's absolutely beautiful. But when I was growing up in Ipswich, there wasn't really a huge amount to do as a sort of young person growing up there.
No, I think you're right actually as well about Norwich, because of the old city walls and the cathedral and so on, is a very attractive city. Ipswich less so, although it had the port, of course, at one point.
Yeah, I mean, my mum always talks about, I don't know too much about the history of Ipswich, but she did say a lot of the stuff got knocked down. A lot of the kind of historical sites and the old buildings seem to have got knocked down early on.
I think that's true. But of course, as you said, I mean, Suffolk itself is not only a nice county, but it's also has some really lovely villages, some outstanding churches, which come from the period when it was the Great Wool County, when, there were lots of sheep and weaving of wool and spinning of wool was a huge industry there. Lavenham and just a great series, those places.
I know, like Woodbridge is absolutely lovely as well.
Yeah. Well, one of my sons was the curate, the assistant priest in Woodbridge. Nice town, and right by nice with the sea there, isn't it, as well, the yachting and so on.
Oh yeah, I was there last lockdown actually. I kept on going swimming every single day in the sea. It was lovely. Felix.
So where were you at school? Locally in Ipswich?
Yeah, so I went to Northgate High School. So that's where I went to for secondary education. So did that. I've got to say, I didn't work as much as I probably would do now. I was a little bit of an underachiever when I was at school. I think you could say a little bit lost in what I wanted to do. But I always found myself drawing and doodling and things like that, and I always say, I know it's kind of a cliche thing to say, but I kind of fell into doing art when I was at school. It was just something I always did on the side, and kind of, if I were to go back into education now, I might take a different route to what I've done. But I really, I've fallen into what I do, but I really enjoy what I've kind of fallen into. But yeah, Northgate was where I studied.
And when you say you fell into art, was it because it's a family inheritance? Are there others in the family who are artistic?
Not particularly. My dad was, though. I mean, he was a lorry driver for 25 years, but he was quite creative. And had he had the opportunities, I think, when he was younger, which he didn't have, he probably would have gone in that area. I think he used to draw quite a bit, and I remember specifically he would used to make kind of caged animals when we were younger, you know, sculptures like a dinosaur and things like that. So other than maybe seeing what he used to do, not particularly. I just always found myself with a kind of pencil in my hand, always a kind of a nervous tick that I'd be drawing all the time and all that kind of stuff, and finding it quite meditative.
Yeah, doodling on the pad next to you, sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, I once did it on the school table, much to the teacher's annoyance, and I remember actually giving me the cleaning products to clean it up at the end of class.
Oh dear, dear me. Yes, I can think of. Yes. Well, no, it's interesting because my father was actually quite talented when it came to art and drawing. I've even got a picture of myself in oils when I was a baby of 18 months. And actually, to paint a picture of a baby is surprisingly difficult because the skin is so, you know, soft and unchanging.
My parents actually have a oil pastel drawing of all. I've got two other siblings of all three of us, like a portrait taken from a photograph, but it's really proportionately off. And like you say, it's very easy if the one eye is slightly wrong, the little touches, and it's actually one of the most scary pictures that I've ever seen in my life. Fortunately, I did quite well out of it. My brother and sister don't look too good in it.
Yes, you were the one who came off okay. Yeah, well, but the sadness is that I don't think I've inherited anything of his artistic talent. Although having said that, when I was at school, normally I went to an old-fashioned grammar school, and you know, well, indeed, stationers school, and really, what tended to happen, there's one person in the class who was clearly quite talented, and the art master would spend most of his time with them. The rest of you would actually be given a piece of paper with lines on it to go and paint in, and you'd get an old jam pot full of water and a paintbrush, you know, and you'd spend your time tinkling the paintbrush against the glass until the teacher got cross, and you know. And so you rather felt that there's only one person who's good at art and the rest of you weren't. Now, just listening to you, someone must have encouraged you.
So yeah, I'm just trying to think back now in the art school whether it was actually, I'd go say further, it was university where I was encouraged by one particular technician who's called Andrew Craig, and he worked at Middlesex University, so that's where I studied illustration.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, so I studied there, and I got fascinated with printmaking there because of, I mean, it's a long story to go into now, but because of the immediacy of seeing a print. I'm not sure if you're familiar with printmaking techniques, but basically you're kind of, for example, if you're doing a lino cut where you're cutting away your image from a flat piece of lino, like linoleum, the flooring, you then ink up the surface once you've cut away the material you don't want to print. You place on a bit of paper on top of that lino and you peel it back, and you basically get this reveal, which is oh so lovely, and happens with all printmaking techniques. In some form, you are hiding your image until you peel up the paper and see what's going on. And that really struck a chord with me. And I think he noticed actually how familiar I was with it. And like you said with your teacher, and it's hard to say this, but we always have it with people that are that enthusiastic, you do spend more time with them in a way, and you kind of help nurture them. And it became one of these things that we were always in the staff room with the technicians, you know, a few of us that were into printmaking. And he sort of, I guess, sort of spent a lot of time with me and kind of gave me a lot of encouragement in that area, and actually forwarded me on to go study in the States.
Yeah, that's interesting. See, our art master, who was great fun actually, and he also used to run the training corps in the school, which I was a member of at one point. But he was called Flick. They called him Flick because if you were misbehaving, as sometimes I was, he'd come behind you and flick his finger behind your ear, and that really hurts. And I remember on one occasion it happened to me. Then he said to me, "You boy, come to the front of the class." He said, "Have you ever had your fortune told lately?" So I said, no, never. In fact, you see, well, let me look at your hand. So he looked at my hand and said, "Oh, look at that line. You're going on a long journey. Woodwork room, I want a chisel and a mallet. Could you go and get it, please, and bring it up to me?" That was the long journey.
Yeah, I quite like that way of teaching. I'm not sure about the flick behind the ear.
No, I think that's right.
I quite like that humour within teaching, and I actually quite like it's really interesting to me, not in so much, obviously printmaking interests me, but generally the idea of teaching interests me, and what makes someone an effective teacher actually really interests me, because it's an interesting skill to be able to kind of relay what you know on a technical level to almost anybody from any background, and being able to do that, because you have a class of 30 students or something like that. You've got to be able to whittle down what you know, which might be too much. Some people will know far too much to be able to teach it well, and be able to make it in a form which is succinct and has clarity towards everybody. And I always find that quite an interesting thing to review. And I think, almost like you say, with a bit of humor, you're able to connect with someone.
You engage with them. No, you're absolutely right. And yeah, there are two things you've mentioned, I think, which are so crucial for teaching. One is engaging people in the first place, so they feel interested. But then secondly, having the ability somehow to boil down the amount that you know, which is almost certainly in most cases more than they will know at that point, in a way that it's actually can be received by them.
Exactly, and editing down what you teach. If you teach every single tiny step to a student, they actually end up learning very little. It's almost kind of not withholding information sometimes is as important as in telling them, because you could open up a can of worms. And actually, I've had students once that might know a very technical process, and they've done the process before, and I've got beginners, and they'll go, "Oh, what about spit by aquatint?" And I'll have to be like, "Oh, we have to kind of slow down there a bit," because you have to keep everyone on the same pace. So yeah,
it sounds to me as if you haven't already, at some point in your career, you ought to be alongside everything else doing a bit of teaching. I think you'd be a natural.
Oh, but yeah, so I've been told that I'm quite a good teacher, and I really enjoy it. I love teaching when students are wanting to learn. It's when they've been told to do something that I kind of when they're not necessarily paying attention, they've just been told to do this workshop. But to be honest with you, by and large, because I work at a university, the students there obviously have applied to do the course, so they're a lot more enthusiastic about it. I think if I were to teach a secondary school class, I think that would be a bit more trickier when it's almost it's a compulsory part of their program and they might not want to do it. I feel quite lucky that I'm teaching students already have decided to go down this creative route.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting, just looking back at your career so far, I mean, you went to Middlesex University. Before that, you engaged somehow with the Kirwan studio.
So
Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, so that was after Middlesex University. So literally, I left Middlesex University. After a few months, I emailed the Kirwan studio, which famously was managed by Stanley Jones, who's a master lithographer and has worked with people like David Hockney, Barbara Hepworth, Henry Moore, very big figures of the time. And he managed it, and I actually wrote him a letter. And then fortunately got a position there as a lithographer. So it was in Cambridge and Linton and Cambridge, sorry. And it was a small village, and they literally had their workshop there. And it was my first taste of collaborating with artists. So they would invite an artist along, and I would collaborate with them on a print for them to make. And this might be an artist that has never done print before, or was quite, or an expert in print. And I would work on with them with producing each layer of a print, because each color on a print is often like this figure you see here. Each color on there is a separate run done at a separate time. So the red might be painted first, then the blue, then the black. So you have to create all these separations with the artist. And then you set about with them producing prints and working on different colors, different alterations, until you've got the okay from the artist, until they sign off the print. And then I would be the one who would be printing the entire edition for them. So Kirwan specifically works with lithography. That's what they're famous for. So it was set up in, I believe, the 58 or 59, I think it was set up, but it was at Cambridge since 2012. It's now in Isleworth outside of London. But yeah, they would specialize in lithography. So do you know a little bit about lithography?
I do. We'll come on to that in a minute, but just staying with Kirwan for a minute.
Yeah.
Kirwan is a name to be, what's the word, conjured with, because a friend of mine used to run sadly, she recently died, but she ran the Kirwan Gallery, which was in Windmill Street in London's West End.
Yes.
And then going back a a bit further, probably a generation now, I don't know, there was the Kirwan press, which produced fantastic prints. You may have seen some of the stuff, have you?
Oh, I have seen when it was a bit more of a commercialized press. Yeah, I've seen some. It was fantastic work. This was before, so it's now known as the Kirwan Studio, but before it, of course, was Kirwan Press, and it has like I said, a long history. Reverend John Kirwan was the one who set it up.
Oh, that's where the name came from. I didn't know that. Tell us a bit about now. Before we get on to prints, I was going to ask you. I mean, one of the things that I quite like, we have quite a few of them around the house, is Victorian and even better sometimes 18th century prints. Often they were black and white, and they were pictures of great buildings and so on and so forth. How do those sort of prints relate to what you're talking about now in the 21st century?
Well, a lot of those works, I suppose, were illustrations to be put in books and things like that, or maps, botanical species, all that kind of thing. It's a much more of a way of recording cultural time or a place or an event. Whereas now, in terms of prints, obviously you've got photography. So obviously photography was the main, I suppose, death of reproductive printmaking. So I suppose that's where it's now going. So it's in terms of original printmaking, artists now are using certain techniques to produce their works. So this is almost different to reproductive prints, where reproductive prints, you're using the print process to recreate an image you already have. So that was what happened with a lot of old prints, especially in engraving. They would be copying a painting. So a lot of the older prints were actually reproductions of paintings that already existed. Now prints are being made in the sole purpose of using that process. So an artist will be using lino cut to create their image because they like the effect of that. And that image doesn't exist in any other medium. So that's what's important now. So even if you were to make a painting and you did a painting and you said, I want this to be a screen print now, that wouldn't actually be classed as original printmaking. That would be classed as a reproduction. And
presumably woodcuts are a similar process to lino cuts, only using wood?
Exactly. So you have wood engraving and wood cuts. So wood cuts, I think we probably argue, I don't know a huge amount of the history of it. It's one of the oldest processes in terms of printmaking. Wood engraving came later. So wood cut, you're going along the grain of the wood. So if you imagine a tree, you're cutting down the middle of it, down the length. So it's softer to cut. Wood engravings are cut against the wood, so the other way. And they're hardwoods, so lemon wood, boxwood, things like that. Very dense, very hard, and different tools are used, but it gives you amazingly fine details. And these were used for illustrations in old books, and they tend to be a lot smaller scale and usually printed black and white is the history of it. I actually don't know if I've ever seen a coloured wood engraving before, though it is possible. You just roll on a different ink, but historically they've always been printed in black and white.
Yeah, we have a few what I'd call wood cuts, which will be exactly as you described. Some lovely stuff. Claire Leighton was a great woodcut artist. But and then there are also metal engravings, which is where you use acid. Is that right, to cut into the metal?
Well, again, I'm going to go off on a tangent here a little bit, but the old processes again of intaglio. So intaglio is the umbrella term for all processes. Etching is an intaglio process. It's a process by which you trap in ink in a metal plate or plastic, and then you wipe the surface, and then you take a print from it from dampened paper. Now that process, historically, in the old days, again, I haven't given a specific date here, but they would use wood engraving tools, but on metal. So they would physically be removing the metal with their hands, which used to be quite a grueling process. I forgot the name of the engraver, but he used to come up with blood on his hands from copper shavings that he was cutting. He was a caricature artist. I've completely forgotten his name, but they used to do this. And I mean, copper is relatively soft, but that used to be a bit of a skill to be able to do. And metal engraving now is hardly ever done because you have etching. So etching is a process by where you have a piece of copper or zinc and you put an acid resist wax ground on the top of the surface of it. You then remove that ground with a needle, exposing the metal inside there. So you're kind of just removing that acid resist ground with a needle. So you don't have to push hard at all. You're literally just removing a very fragile ground. That then goes into the acid, and the acid will then bite away all those grooves. And then you put in ink inside those grooves and then run it through the press. once you've polished off the surface.
Now, I think I interrupted you a bit earlier on about lithography, so we'll come back to that now, because I suppose I imagine lithography was something where you produced an image, which you then laid some other medium on top, a piece of paper or canvas or something, and it then printed off from that other surface. But lithography sounds, the word litho means stone. So anyway, over to you.
So yeah, to go quickly through the older processes, relief is whereby you have a flat material you cut into, basically producing a negative because the areas you've cut hasn't inked. Intaglio is a process almost like the reverse, because in relief, your raised areas are getting inked. Intaglio, it's where you have created indentations, incisions inside the plate, which then get inked. So it's almost the reverse of relief. Lithography is a planographic process. So like you say, lithography is stone and graphy is to draw on. It's to draw on stone. And what's funny about people saying stone lithography is that they're repeating the stone element twice. So you're basically saying stone, stone. So it's almost not a really thing that you would say, but it's used because metal plates are now used. So you can use zinc, you can use aluminium, and you can use photo plates. So it's a really way of clarifying, because stone lithography using stone is quite rare at the moment. People make an emphasis on that. So probably this is me making this up maybe, but that's probably why it was done. So people knew it was made from a stone. But it's a planographic process. So it works on a completely flat plane. Okay, it's a chemical printing process. So whereas the others were a physical process where you're cutting in or using acid to bite away, this is a chemical printing process. So it's very sensitive. But basically, traditionally, you would have a slab of limestone and you would grain that surface of that limestone. So it was completely flat and also had a tooth to it. Most works would require a tooth, so that when you draw directly on there, it would kind of grip away at your crayon or your greasy ink. And all the drawing materials used in lithography are oil-based. So they have fat in them. So you just draw your original design directly onto the stone with crayons or touche. Touche is a term for a greasy ink that we use. So you can get like washers and things like that. That then gets etched on the surface of the stone so that the grease reservoirs in that drawing material sinks a little bit inside the stone, about the depth of a cigarette paper, I've heard. And when you keep that stone damp, what will happen is that the water will repel away from the oil-based material, because of course oil and water repel each other. And that's the premise of lithography, the antipathy of oil and water. So when you've kept that stone damp, when you roll on with oil-based ink, ink will only adhere to your image, and the water will create a barrier in your non-image areas, which is what keeps your stone clean. So if your stone was dry and you were to roll on with this ink, the entire stone would get inked and you'd probably ruin your image because it would go too dark. But yeah, if your stone's damp, you ink up your image, you then place paper on top of this stone, which has now received ink, and it goes underneath a press. So there's lots of different printmaking presses, but lithography works on a press which the stone goes on a big bed, slab of a flat material. It then goes under high pressure. So if you imagine this is your stone with the paper on top, there's a thing called a scraper bar, which goes on top. It gets put down and releases quite high pressure, and basically the stone goes through the press underneath that scraper bar. So that's what applies the pressure. You then peel it up and then reveal the impression. So that's the direct printing process. There are different technologies such as offset, which work on the image going on a rubber blanket, which then goes onto the paper, which solves the problem of printmakers having to reverse their image. Because of course, like lithography, like etching and like relief printing, all your images, because your paper's on top, come out in reverse. So if you're doing text and things like that, you have to kind of mirror everything, and there are techniques of solving that problem, but it's it's one of those things in printmaking.
That's really amazing. I think in a very short space, you've given us a very clear idea of how the thing works. And I see that you became eventually a master printer, a master lithographer, I suppose.
Well, it's the title. Yeah.
Well, it's very good. And then that was with Tamarind Lithography, and through them also you received a stationer's grant, I think.
Exactly. So when I was at university, I got into all the printmaking processes. Lithography happened to be one of the last processes that I got into, and I was fascinated with it. Had to teach myself, but this technician that I told you about, Andrew Craig, he told me about this place called Tamarind Institute based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, this place takes on 8 students per year for a 9-month intensive course. And it's all about you learning the technical skills to become an effective collaborator with an artist, both technically speaking, but also your kind of demeanor and how you collaborate with them, almost like psychology, really, how you collaborate with an artist, because it's quite an intimate thing when you're working with an artist that would often be working in quite solitary conditions and putting their ideas into print. But anyway, we would be learning the technical skills for doing this. So it wasn't about our own work at all whatsoever. So this is what was unique about this course. It wasn't about your own printmaking. It was about you producing for other people.
And did this happen here or in New Mexico?
This was in New Mexico. So that's where I went to go study. So that's why I needed the funding. So when I applied, I got in. So to my surprise, I remember ringing my mum up quite late in the evening, and I won't say the exact words she used, but she went, bloody hell, you know. She wasn't, because she didn't think, you know, she didn't think I'd get in, and I was going to New Mexico by myself. But I had to raise, so for that, I had to raise $18,000 for the visa requirements. So, and I only had about 3 months to do that job. So, to go there beforehand, I found out about the charities and the stationers. I took out a professional career loan with Barclays, which was very helpful. But everywhere, getting all that money, it all happened quite fast, and it meant that I could go. So once I'd completed that that course with 8 other students, we were in the opportunity to apply for the second year. So in the first year, you're learning basically the rudimentary skills of lithography, and then in the second half of that first year, you're collaborating with MA students. You then apply for the second year. So the second year, you'd be underneath the master printer and their professional workshop. So they would have their own gallery, and they would invite artists to come make lithographs. So unfortunately, I was one of 2 people selected to undertake that apprenticeship. So I then moved from the student side to the professional side. And it was one of those bittersweet moments. I'd never been in such an environment where you're with 7 other classmates all going in for the same job, basically, and getting it. And then obviously, you know, it's one of those moments after with competition and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But so I spent.
Anyway, yeah, that's really, really, really exciting. We probably need to come to a conclusion, but as we come to a conclusion, why don't we finish with stationers? Yeah. So your relationship with stationers has continued.
Yes, it has. Yeah, so it's continued. So when it started, I'm now Freeman of the company.
The company, yeah.
As it were, and and I've been receiving a mentorship from Trevor Fenwick. Yeah. So and the idea at the moment is to kind of set up a workshop eventually. So that's kind of my plan for now.
He'll be a very good person to talk to, because he's done remarkable things, and you know, he's in a world class, of course. So that's really good news. And I hope we'll be able to meet soon when we can all meet again properly. And I hope you'll go on to become a liveryman as well.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
And I'll happily be one of your sponsors if you want to do that.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
No, it's been really good chatting to you. Okay.
Apologies, I went on a bit too much. I could talk about printmaking for hours.
Don't worry. Anyway, let's look forward to meeting.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. Thank you so much.